Come again to this lesson. This time we are talking about data structures in Visual Basic. Now, what is data structures? In our previous lecture, we talked about control structures. These are structures that control the flow of code or how statements are executed. Now, this time around, we are moving to data structures. Now, we understand data is whatever we supply our program with, any value or variables or group of items that we need to supply in our code. Now, data structures in this case, we are referring now to group of data elements that are organized in a single unit. So if I have several elements that are organized in a single unit or can be used as a single variable, then they qualify to be data structures in Visual Basic. One of the example is arrays. Now, arrays is just a list of variables, but they share the same name. That means you have several variables, but they are grouped together under one name, and they are of the same data type. If it's an integer, it's an integer variables. If it is string, it's going to be a string variable. So that is an array. And in most cases, these elements are organized in a consecutive memory location. That means one after the other. In that case, we mean that when they are being stored in a consecutive manner. They are given index values from index 0 up to the maximum index. So the lowest index, that is index 0, becomes your subscript, and the last value in your array will have the highest index, which is a superscript. Yeah, so arrays have elements inside, we understand, and these elements sometimes also we can say it has an upper and a lower bound element. That means, as we have talked about the index value, you'll always have a lower and an upper bound values in your array. Yeah, so that means even how your memory is organized, then it is organized in such a way that values or elements are indexed according to where they are stored in that array. Now, we have several examples of arrays, but I want to talk also about the properties of arrays. Now, arrays, because they are a group of elements, then that means array has a length property. Yeah, array has a length property. The length property means that the number of items in the array gives the array the length. Then array has the size of the data that is holding. So the size simply is the type of data. If it's holding integer, we know integers have sizes. If it's holding strings, if it's holding currency or whatever, so there is the size element in an array. Now, how do you define an array in Visual Basic? Now, before even we go there, let's talk about how do you access elements of an array. Now, to access the elements of an array, we call it traversing, or you're moving, you're scanning, or you're looking up. Now, when you define an array, we use, especially in Visual Basic, we use the parentheses or we use the brackets. Unlike other programming codes where we use the square brackets, in Visual Basic, we normally use the normal parentheses or the C brackets. Now, if I were to define an array of a number of elements, then I will call that array a fixed sized or a static array. This is an array of a fixed number of elements. That means I have statically define how many elements I want, if it's 10 or if it's 5. But also I can have a dynamic array. That means the length of the array grows when the program is running. The number of items can be added or can be removed from the array during running of the program. So the size, that means the size property of the array keeps on changing. It is not static, it is dynamic. Okay, so those are two types of arrays we have. Now, if you specify an upper bound index in your array declaration, that means if you specify the highest number of elements, then you're going to have a fixed size array. So if I say my array is of 5, that means array call, for example, bonus, array bonus, and then into brackets I have 5. Then what I mean is the 5 means I'll have 6 items in my array, because I've told you an array always begins with 0 index. So if you count from 0 to 5, you get 6 elements. So if I specify array of bonus into brackets 5, then that means I'm declaring 6 elements. But what if I use both the upper bound and the lower bound index in my array? Therefore, I can specify maybe array of bonus starting with 1, index 1 to index 5. So in this case, I will have strictly 5 elements, because it's not counting from 0. It's actually counting from 1. So I have specified array called bonus, then into brackets 1 to 5. So you see it has 1, then to 5. So 1 becomes the lower bound and 5 becomes the upper bound index in my array. If you leave your parentheses without any value, for example, I say array bonus, then into brackets nothing, then that one will mean that you'll have an array that is dynamic, or an array that is variable. It can have any number of elements when you don't put a value inside the brackets. And in most cases, when you are capturing something from a user, maybe you're getting a number of items from the user, or you're getting a string of items, you may want to put them in a variable array or in a dynamic array. So you don't specify the size limit, because you don't know the number of elements that are going to be supplied by the user. Now, how do we access the elements in an array? So if you are to access elements in an array, you have to use the index of the element. For example, now if I had an array that has numbers the first starting number is 3, then it's followed by 2, then 1, 5, and 6. I have an array of 5 elements. Therefore, my 3, because it's the beginning element, it's going to occupy index 0. So if my array, I was calling it count, it's integer count, int count is an array, then I'll say int count into brackets 0. That means now in this case 0 means the index is equal to 3. So simply this one means my first element in that array is number 3. So if I were to initialize all of them, initializing an array, then my array is made up of 3, 2, 1, 5, 6. Those are 5 elements. Then to initialize the first item, which is in index 0, I will say int count. If the name of my array is count, for example, int count into brackets 0 is equal to 3. That means that is the first element stored there. So if the second element is 2, I'll say int count into brackets 1 is equal to 2. That means 2 is my second element in that array. Int count into brackets 2 is equal to number 1. That means number 1 is the third element stored in my array, like that. So that is how you initialize them in Visual Basic. You have to specify the array name, then into brackets the index, or put the value of the index to mean the location of the value that you want to initialize. Yeah, that means if again I wanted to change, for example, my first value, which is 3, and change it to 100, then I'll say int count at 0 into bracket 0 is equal to 100. So it will overwrite 3, just like that. Now, variable length arrays, I've said, is when you declare them without the index element or without the array upper bound number in the parenthesis. Then if you omit that upper bound number in your parenthesis, then your array becomes a dynamic array. That means this array can grow to any number. It can increase. You can use the redeem. By now we understand what is to dim or to dimension. So if you are going to alter the size of your dynamic array in your program, then for example you are dimmed your array, then the size changes, then you are allowed to resize your array later by using the word redimension. So it's like you are reassigning it again. Okay, an example will be if I was creating an array of 2 elements starting with index 0, and I have at index 0 the name Alec, and at index 1 the name Jack. So if I were to change its size, I will redeem it. I will say redeem, for example, my array was called names. I will say then redeem it and specify the size, or don't put the size. Now we have also multidimensional arrays. Multidimensional arrays are simply arrays that form like a table. They are made up of a number of rows and columns. You see, an array itself is like a row. Now when you have several of these rows, then it becomes a multidimensional array, meaning that it is made up of rows and columns, like a table in that case. So a multidimensional array can be an array that is of a table-like, made up of rows and columns. Now how do you declare this one and how do you define it? Now if you are to define it, where we put the value of the upper bound and the lower bound index, we have now to use 2 indexes. The first index will mean a row, and the next index inside the parenthesis will mean a column. And in this case, you're going to put a comma. So for example, if I have an array, a multidimensional array called books, and I have called it string books, then into brackets, to determine now if it's a multidimensional array, I'll say give me 4 rows and 2 columns. So I'll say 4, 2. Yeah, then it will create for me an array made up of 5 rows and 2 columns. Why 5 rows and I've said 4? Because we say arrays, they always begin at 0. So that means by specifying 4, 2, my rows will start from 0, row 0, row 1, row 2, like that up to row 4. They will become 5 of them. Then 2 is for the columns. Now we have several examples there. You can check from your notes how you come up with multidimensional arrays. Now another data structure we are going to talk about will be maybe structures like we'll be talking about structures, other structures like user-defined data structures, because we have also user-defined, what we call UDTs. This means these are some way a programmer can define his own way of grouping several variables to operate as one. And some of these user-defined data structures, they have a scope where they operate because they are user-defined. Some may operate at module level, or you may have to declare them at module level. Some can operate at at project level. That means they can become global. So we said you can use the keyword public or private to make your variables be available to other modules. But before we jump into that and see what type of user-defined data types we have, we also have a way we do searching of elements in an array. And there are some two types of searching when you are looking up for values in an array, because an array is made up of a group of elements which operate as a single entity. So we have two types of searches. We have linear search and binary search. Now, beginning with the linear search or serial search. So serial search is when you're looking up for items in an array in a sequential manner or in one after the other. So that is called linear search. So you can traverse or go through elements one after the other, not skipping. For example, you're searching for an item in an array, then you have to basically go through all the passes, looking at the adjacent or at the neighbors of the elements you're looking for. Yeah, so that one is a serial search, because elements in this case are being, you're looking at them or you're searching for them in a serial manner or one after the other. And when you find the item, then you'll say you've found a matching item if the item matches the index of your search or it matches the criteria of your search. That one is a serial search. The examples there, you have to look at them. We also have the second type of searching of elements in an array called binary search. Now the word binary or bi is 2. So when you're doing binary search, you're saying you split your array into 2. So if you're searching for an element in an array and you have split your array into 2 groups, simply means that you'll check now that element you are looking for in any of the two halves. So if your criteria meets the first half, then the second half is going to be discarded. So you see, it reduces the time for you to search. If your searching criteria is in the upper or in the second half of the array that you have split, then you discard the first one. So you see, in this case, the execution or the searching for elements becomes easier. Yeah, so there is also a code there for a binary search, whereby now you divide your array into 2. Maybe you divide them at the center and search at the half that is going to satisfy your criteria. Another thing we have with arrays is sorting. There's a difference between searching for an item and sorting items. Now, when we are talking about sorting items, we're simply saying in what order are these elements arranged? Are they arranged from the least item in terms of value to the highest item in terms of value, or from the highest to the least? In this case, we mean, are they in ascending or are they in descending order? So sorting, we have several structures for sorting arrays, and one of the structure we have is called a bubble sort. So a bubble sort is a type of sorting where this algorithm scans through all the elements in your array, and if the first index is greater than the second in your array, then it does the swapping. So it has to compare the first index and the second index. And if you are sorting your array in a particular criteria, either ascending or descending, then it will check and then it will swap the values. Swapping means that you have to exchange them. So the procedure is repeated until all values are arranged in the order that you have specified. So that means in this case, the technique will have to make several passes through the array. I mean, you have to go through several passes. Pass is when you traverse through an array from the first to the last, then you do the swapping, then you go to the next, like that. So for every pass you are swapping. For every pass you're swapping. Those are called passes. Yeah, so you'll have that swapping until the values are correctly sorted. So the name bubble simply means these values bubble up. The smaller values bubble up, like the way bubbles bubble up in a soda. So the smaller values are popping up, you know, like bubbles, and that's why it got its name. There are advantages and disadvantages of this array, of this sorting technique. We have another sorting technique called insertion sort. So the insertion sort, ama to insert, is a way sorting is made whereby the sort keeps making the left side of the array sorted. Yeah, so the left side of the array keeps on being sorted until the whole array is sorted. So this is an insertion sort. It's basically like having some two containers, and whereby you bring values from the array you're sorting and placing them to another container until you have the whole array sorted out. So this is done repeatedly until values that are sorted in the left array. Yeah. So there are also advantages and disadvantages of the same, and you can compare them. We have another type of sort called shell sort. So shell sort is a type of sorting whereby the elements that are far away, or their distance, they are compared with the adjacent elements, yeah, and before sorting is done. So in this case, we normally keep on dividing the distance. That is, if you have 6 elements, the distance is 6, then you can divide the distance by 2, so that you have 2 sets of arrays, and you go through those 2 types of lists, and you keep on dividing the length of the array, keep on dividing it by 2. So that means your array keeps on reducing, so it becomes even faster, because that means you're skipping the part that does not satisfy your criteria, or you basically have an easy way of sorting by looking at the different sets of array as you keep on dividing it. So it improves efficiency and quickly makes you sort your items in a particular criteria. So that one is a shell sort, and in Visual Basic, basically those are the kind of sorting techniques we are familiar with now. Now, there is also this term that we have also talked about it in class, called control arrays. Now, control arrays simply means it's an array of your controls on a form. If you have a form in your Visual Basic, that form has a number of objects that you have placed in that form. So if you place a number of objects, for example, command buttons or text boxes, and there are a number of them, they are of the same type, then they become a control array. they have the same name, they have indexes, because they are many, and they can be controlled using one name or one variable. So they become a control array, or is an array of controls or array of objects. Now, I had talked about user-defined data types. These are structures, data structures, which are both static and dynamic, but they are defined by the programmer. So the syntax for defining your UDTs is use the keyword type, because you are defining a type. So you say type, then my UDT, the name you're going to give it. Then the properties of your UDT, or the variables that you're going to list there in your UDT, you specify whether they are static or they are dynamic. For example, if you are going to have a UDT dealing with arrays, then you can list them there. But also you can have a UDT that deals with constants. You call it enum. Enum is an abbreviation of the word enumeration, and enumeration simply means list of constants. Or when you're working with a constant is a value that does not change. It is stored in a location whereby the value does not change. It becomes a constant. So if you have a list of constants which happen to be they are grouped as a type or in one variable, call your UDT, call whatever name, then they become an enum, or a list of constants. So that is another type of, and if you are to define a unum, then you use the keyword unum first, then the unum, the enumeration name, the name you're going to give to that list. But you have to use the keyword enum. Then the name, if I was defining unums for weekdays, I'll say enum weekdays. Then my first weekday is Monday. I'll say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like that. And then I end unum. That means I end the definition of the unum. If I'm going to define a UDT of a particular type, I'll say type, then the name of my UDT, I'm a user defined. Then my variables there, I list them, then I end type, because I am defining type of data. So those are some of the things in Visual Basic that are very important in your code that you have to be well versed with. So let me stop for now.